And to give you a bit of a lay of the land of what we'll be talking about during the course of the next 2 hours, a couple of things. I've got some guests coming along. Do look forward to having, I believe we have a law enforcement guest coming in. I believe it's Idaho State Police today. We've had a very deadly summer on state roads. That may well be a topic of discussion during the course of that visit. Also, following 9 o'clock news today, we have a guest who used to work for what was called INS, Immigration and Naturalization Services, way back in the 1970s, and then he moved on and he worked in a couple of successor agencies right up until just about the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which next month will be the 14th anniversary. His name is Michael Cutter. He is scheduled to join us in the next hour of the program, and he's going to be talking about a warning that he's been issuing to people in government. He's often testified before committees in Washington, and he says that the immigration problems in this country could well lead us to another 9/11 style attack or worse. And he says we have not been paying enough attention to who is coming into this country. And that is one of the reasons he is making such a strong argument. He's written some books about this subject. You may have seen him before on some network television shows as well. He comes from an immigrant family. His father was descended from Cossacks in Russia, and his mother's family descended from Jews in Poland who were wiped out in World War II during the Holocaust. So he's got a phenomenal backstory, and as I say, was in law enforcement, actually in immigration law enforcement, for much of his life before retiring a short while ago. That's on the way on this program, as I say, just after the 9 o'clock news today. Speaking of immigration to this country and who is coming here, I saw a couple of things. One of these pieces, I have to thank some local folks in town. They keep me updated with a lot of this. They have a site where they post a great many details that you would not find, let's say in the fish wrapper that calls itself a local newspaper. This is from a website called Creeping Sharia. The headline is this: Arabic is most common language of refugees in America, 91% on food stamps. Now, for those of you who are public school graduates, 91% means more than 9 out of 10. If that helps with the number. And the writer says the State Department documents that the most common spoken language among refugees in America is Arabic. Out of the 11,300 refugees admitted to the U.S. this fiscal year, 4,430 speak Arabic. Now, that number, 4,430, out of a little over 11,000, is approaching one-third. One-third of all immigrants to this country. The Center for Immigration Studies noted that the nation's legal and illegal immigrant population hit a record 41.3 million in the summer of 2013. That would be the last year, of course, that they have on record, up 1.4 million since July 2010. Refugees from both Africa and the Middle East were users of the most cash assistance. That means your tax dollars. Noting that 91.4% of refugees from the Middle East were on food stamps, also known as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. They had to change the name. It was a branding issue. You know, food stamps had such a bad reputation. It's a little bit like liberals now calling themselves progressives. They drive these words into the ditch, and then they have to go find something else and rebrand themselves, even though it's the same awful taste that you get in your mouth when you're dealing with them. 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you this morning. A little chilly to start our day at 58. And, of course, you can reach our program today by dialing me up at 736-0300, 736-0300. We had a visitor in town yesterday by the name of Mike Simpson. Some of you may well know that he is a member of the House of Representatives in Washington, and he represents pretty much all of eastern Idaho and this part of southern Idaho. And Mr. Simpson was in town hosting some sort of media event. Oddly enough, nobody at KLIX gets invited to this thing. I checked that out with Benito Baeza earlier this morning. I said, Benito, do you get invitations? And he said, no. I guess there might be some point in all of that, but this comes from the website of KMVT-TV. And Mr. Simpson was speaking apparently with television and newspaper folks in town yesterday, ignoring everyone else. And here's a couple of paragraphs I'd like to share with you. Simpson said, quote, I understand there is concerns currently among the community about Syrian refugees and what could be happening there and whether they've identified themselves correctly and how they're vetted and the type of thing. We've been in contact with the State Department and talked to them about the vetting process, unquote. Well, what does that mean? I can call up the grocery store and say, do you have milk? And then I can say, oh, I've talked to them about their milk issue and I will get to the bottom of it. but he doesn't really go into any detail. Is he for this or is he against it? Well, next paragraph. Simpson says he supports the idea of the State Department or the FBI coming to Twin Falls to address these concerns. Yeah, okay. Address these concerns. What does that mean? Well, they'll come to a presentation, they'll allow a few people to spout off, and then they'll leave and nothing will change. And it also says that he is proud of the refugee program for what they do. And by the way, a lot of my campaign contributors also managed to get a lot of cheap labor out of this program. And let me just tell you, it's a wonderful, wonderful program. So what if some of these guys shoot up a recruiting station down the road? I'll still be in office, and let me tell you, none of these people will live in my neighborhood. They'll live in yours. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. And what's on your mind?
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air.
I was just wondering, I live here mostly, I moved to the area, but I just would like to see that, we've got to be able to make some changes here in our government, and it's just funny that the people aren't willing to go stand up and say, hey, you work for us,
Doesn't matter anymore.
So
because the people who write all of the campaign checks for the campaign contributions, that carries more sway, and they're telling your congressman that he works for them, and he's looking more at that money than he is at any potential votes, because they figure down the road they can smear it all over by putting up so many TV, radio ads during the course of a campaign that you'll forget about all of these other things.
Well, that's the problem. There's a few of us don't forget, and I just know that I voted for Mr. Simpson, and he won't be receiving my vote for this vote.
Well, I got to let you run because your call's breaking up on me, but I got the gist of it, and he's really identifying what a lot of people in national media are just waking up to, and that is because we have some candidates who early on in this campaign for president, very early on, have managed to really tap into a public anger, both on the left and the right. And a lot of that anger is starting to become unified, which is even more interesting. I was mentioning the other day, I heard an interview some months ago with Ralph Nader, and he'd been up in New Hampshire at some event, and he was saying that he's even hearing from a lot of Tea Party folks. Nader, being on the other side of that political equation, says the Tea Party folks are just as worried about some of the same things he's been talking about for years. So here you have a political class that is more interested in how it's going to maintain its political office. Let me tell you something. Everybody involved in this refugee program lives in a neighborhood where they will have no refugees as neighbors. Let's make that clear. They will not have them as neighbors. They may own the flop houses that they'll rent to them when they first come here, and they can profit handsomely from that. But none of these people who live in these castle-like communities will ever have to deal with any of these people living just next door or down at the end of the block. You will. And so for that reason, they tell you they can't understand what all of the worries are about. It's 8:15. You're up next. You're on the air with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and welcome.
Good morning, Bill. It's Representative Simpson was the one that was very vocal and outspoken against Michelle Bachmann, who was a Congress lady at the time, over a year or two ago. Said there's no Muslim Islamic influence in our State Department. I mean, she was very, very vocal about that, and it made national news. And it's just, you can put your head in the sand, but what part of no vetting, and ISIS is going to use the refugee program to bring in their terrorist jihad? What part of that doesn't our local people understand?
How come it is? I mean, I hear this from conservatives especially, and Idaho supposedly is among the reddest of states in the country. How is it that a man like Simpson maintains that office? Is it just that no one of any real stature, other than the loudest guy in the tavern, decides to primary him?
Well, the whole thing is the Republican establishment in the state gets behind him, and anybody that's a conservative, constitutionalist, or so forth, they get, shouted down, and by the establishment Republicans. That's really what happens. And we've had some good candidates in the last couple of go-arounds, but, Simpson can do no wrong, it seems, but he can say those kinds of things and get away with it.
I thank you much for the call. I just, in fact, I want to point out what this comment says that I'm reading at the website of KMVTV, KMVT. It says, I understand there's concerns, and then but he basically goes on to say nothing. He doesn't take a stand. He just says, well, maybe the FBI and the State Department will come out here and send a couple of people to talk about it. Well, talk it to death if you like, but we're not doing anything about it. You're up next, and you're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story.
Yeah, I've been fighting with Simpson for years. He's got money in his back pocket because he's fought for things that the public here has been against for years and years. And the only way we're going to change him is to get him out. And Bill, you know what the biggest problem with our country is? We need to go back to what JFK said. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what it can do.
Well, here's a question, and I'll throw this out to people. If someone of the stature of a Frank Vandersloot suddenly said, I don't want this guy around anymore, Simpson would be gone the next day. Let's be honest about that. The problem is we can't get any of the people who can really move and shake things to get behind a candidate who could stand up to this guy in a primary. You're up next. You're on the air. We've got about a minute before a break. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. Thank you for your call. The people listening that don't vote, they are the problem. Simpson's not the problem. I can't stand Simpson. But it's not him. It's you people. You sit at home and you sit here and bitch and whine on the radio because Simpson's this and Simpson's that, but you won't vote. You're the problem. And until we get this country getting to 45, 50, 60% people voting, you will continue to be the problem. You are the reason we got Obama. You guys are the reason we got these these dipsticks in office, because you folks will sit on your butt waiting for somebody else to go out and vote for you. And until the country starts voting, which other countries don't have the opportunity to do, until we start doing that, we're going to continue getting this stuff.
Well, and thank you for the call. All I can say on that topic is, I know a lot of people out there who do complain a lot, and they do not show up on election day because, well, it was raining or because I had to run a couple of other errands. And yet, here you go. There have been multiple times this man has been primaried. Is it that the primary opponents are even worse, or is there something? Because you need someone who's going to go out there, if they're going to primary someone and they need a clean background, they need to be articulate. And they just can't be, standing there screaming about. I made that comparison to the loudest guy in the tavern. Oftentimes I go to a Tea Party meeting and it seems the loudest guy there, everyone says, oh, gee, he must be really smart. No, he's just the loudest guy there. And then that's the guy they end up saying, you know what, you should run against the congressman. And then that guy fails. We need someone of a really big stature. But so far I haven't seen anyone in the political class willing to take on this issue. There you go. It doesn't appear it's going to go anywhere. If you'd like to reach our program today, our telephone number is 736-0300, 736-0300, or you can email me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And that's bill.colley, last name spelled Colley, at townsquaremedia.com. Long email address, but still it's easy to get through to me that way. In fact, the emailer says, hi, Bill, the reason Simpson keeps getting in is because the Mormon machine is always voting him in. It's what they call the Mormon machine, or what we call the Mormon machine. Well, that's about a third of the state's residents, and most of them are Republicans, and they do have some clout. Let's be honest about that. 824, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I'll get to our telephone callers in just a second. Stay on the line. I promise I'll get to you. I do want to mention our good friends at High Desert Meat Processing. They process one animal at a time. What you bring in is what you get back. That's key. That's critical. They've just joined our program this week. Darren Van Horn, owner of High Desert Meat Processing in Twin Falls, Idaho, has over 30 years of experience in the meat business. Visit High Desert Meat Processing on Facebook. Read reviews from other customers. You can give High Desert Meat Processing a call for all of your wild game and domestic processing needs. High Desert Meat does in-house smoking. Nothing gets shipped out. Jerky, pepperoni, summer sausage, kielbasa, breakfast sausage, steaks, Polish dogs, hot dogs, and more. In that grouping, I can't tell you what I like best. I'd have to have a plate full of all of them and then tell you afterward. We have a caller with us. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story at 8:25.
Yes, Bill. This Clean Water Act was published in June 28th, and it will go into effect at the end of August. And the effect that it is having, it's already generated all kinds of lawsuits, and it hasn't even went into effect yet. And Simpson's on the funding committee, appropriation committee for the EPA, and not a word, not one word about it, about these farmers he cares so much about, how he walks through the grain field when he's, getting reelected, and he cares about these Idaho farmers. But then I see an article in the paper about Boulder White Clouds and how he's up there, and that's his baby. I guess it'll have his name on it. And then when Jade Helm 15, the exercise was when they did it a couple of weeks ago down in Texas and wherever else, he got on the only time I ever see him on national news was he was talking about how it was a conspiracy theory and he wanted to make sure we all knew it, but not a word about anything that mattered. And so he's a terrible, terrible man. And, he's a citizen of Washington, D.C. He doesn't even come back here. And I know that because the people that go to church with him have told me so. He doesn't go to church here in Idaho anymore.
Well, and it's a long trip, I guess. I can add to that, too. I read his comments this morning, for instance, about Planned Parenthood, and like everyone else in the Republican Party, claims to be shocked. But no one seems to be in any hurry to do anything about it. Once again, they all try to say the right things, but we have lots of talk, and we have no people of action anymore.
We don't, and you say we've been for 8 years, or not quite, since Obama's been elected, we have been talking about how we're losing our country, and we're getting to a point where we can't return, and we keep saying it, and it keeps getting worse, and we really don't know where that is, and people are afraid.
Yeah, thank you much for the call. I just looked up at the TV set. Al D'Amato was on. I was mentioning him the other day. I used to consider him to be actually a friend when I used to meet him at various news events and the like. Al D'Amato was one of the last people I knew in Republican Party politics who, when he said something, it was almost like Trump. I mean, he would just blurt something out, but you know what? It was a truth. And he was one of the last people in Washington. He's been gone from the Senate scene now for, 15 years. But he was one of the last people in Washington who would just come out and say it. It was wonderful to hear. I got a great story about Al D'Amato and my mother one time and how he remembered people from sometimes 4 or 5 years down the road. But I'll tell you that another day. We have about 1 minute before the break. You're up next with Bill Colley.
Yeah, Bill, I'm a little offended by that email. I mean, don't label Mormons as a machine or anything else.
But I'm sick and tired of people being offended. The fact of the matter is, I think her point is, I think that the emailer's point is that there's a powerful political force there, and it's enormous, and that it often votes as a block. And if it's voting as a block, and you know what, I go vote for people. I don't necessarily look at what their religious faith is. I try to find the person, and I don't even care what they do in their personal life any longer. I'm trying to find someone. Cal Thomas once made a great statement, and he was talking on television about how back in the 1970s, his church put out a list of people who were good Christians you should do business with in the community. And he said there was a list of various people who could repair automobiles, and Thomas said, I just wanted someone to repair my car. I didn't care where they went to church. I want someone who knows something about automobiles. It doesn't, whether they're Jewish, Muslim, or Baha'i, or whatever their faith is. He said, I just want someone who can fix my car. I think that makes sense too. And at some point, you've got to look at it that way. A lot of Roman Catholics voted for John Kennedy in 1960. Boy, did they ever get duped. And it just, you've got to vote for the people who will rescue this country and not just someone who's, they're a lot like me. It's kind of how I look at it. We have a guest coming along in just a moment. Going to talk a little law enforcement. 59 right now at our studios. It's 8:30. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Saw a good piece today from a writer by the name of Jeff Greenfield. You may remember him. He used to host it didn't have very good ratings. When I was a young man, he was a host of a program TV program on, I believe it was ABC News, which was one of the best programs, I thought, most balanced programs on TV at the time. That was back before media really became dominated by the entertainment culture, which even news media today. I got to get to that in a few minutes. He's talking about why Donald Trump has dominated the political discussion so far. First, I want to remind you, coming up next Wednesday on our program between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, Dr. Jonathan Tripp will be joining us from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, Idaho. He's going to be talking a little bit about imaging options. What does he mean by that? Well, X-rays, MRIs, CT scans, ultrasound, fluoroscopy. He's also going to tell you you have a right to shop around, and that you have a right to keep images, the copies. And he said there are sometimes side effects with these things you should know about as well. So before anything like that comes up, there's some basic questions you should be asking of a doctor. And that'll be next Wednesday morning. Remember, Tripp Family Medicine, they join us on Wednesday mornings. Take some of your telephone calls as well. This is your opportunity to speak to the medical professionals directly. It won't cost you a thing. Unless, of course, you're using one of those old-fashioned payphones, but I don't think I've seen one of those in years. 8:45, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 61, and we have a caller joining us. You're on the air. What's on your mind?
Is that me?
It is.
Well, thank you. I wanted to let you know that I do enjoy your program very much. I think you're pretty much on a lot of things. I wanted to comment about the religious aspect and the Mormon machine, and also on political. I think as far as the Mormons are concerned, I do think there's a majority in Idaho and Utah, and I do think they vote for a Mormon. And I think that's why, let's see, the guy in Utah, Orrin Hatch, and
Sure.
Mike Crapo, and yeah, but you know what? I think they've all been compromised some way. They've either been paid a big amount of money, or their families have been threatened. They may tell them, we know where your family is, and if you don't vote this way, we know where you live, and we know where your family is, and or they pay them off with a big amount of money.
I think Orrin Hatch is a little bit too much of an insider in Washington. However, he used to own, to my knowledge, if I recall, I think he used to own a television station in Salt Lake City. And as I understand it, he was, according to the people who worked there, about the finest boss you could ever come across. So I give him some slack there. He's genuinely a nice guy, and that probably wins him a lot of votes.
And that might be true. But if you look at his voting record, he's not always online on that.
Absolutely.
And I think he's kind of a traitor.
Recently,
anyway.
I'd say so. Yeah, especially when it comes to Ted Cruz. Hey, I thank you very much for the telephone call. Cruz, of course, took on the majority leader in the U.S. Senate a few weeks ago, and then Hatch immediately jumped in and started defending Mitch McConnell and basically called out Ted Cruz. Well, Cruz wasn't wrong. That's the point. And the fact of the matter is, saying that something is bad or wrong makes you right. It makes the other guy wrong. And yet they're defending things in Washington that are clearly and blatantly wrong. And the general American public sees that. I've got to tell you, I voted for Mitt Romney, of course, in 2012, and I had no qualms about doing that because I thought Mitt Romney, from the standpoint of a good guy, was one of the finest human beings. And I thought a man like him in the White House, number one, you never have to worry about a sex scandal like you do with Bill Clinton. Number two, there was a whole number of reasons I voted for him just because I thought he was that much better than the alternative. I looked at third-party candidates, but realized none of them were going to have a snowball's chance in 2012. My neighbor also voted for Mitt Romney. My neighbor, one of my best friends at the time in Delaware, also Mormon, he was going to vote for Romney, probably because of the shared faith, but also because he understood Mitt Romney was a far better alternative than Barack Obama. But the question comes in places like Idaho, Nevada, and Utah. Hey, if you're voting for Harry Reid because he's a fellow Mormon, Harry Reid, look at what he supports. It runs counter to the teaching of that church. Why vote for that? He's in the Catholic Church, that would be called bringing grave scandal to your faith. And we would be told, don't vote for that individual. Or we should be told, but we aren't. We should be told that. We have another caller with us. You're on the air with Bill Colley. It's 8:48.
Yes, is that me?
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to comment about if the Mormons are following their so-called Mormon prophet, I don't think he's going to save them. But I think I wanted to ask you if you've ever read the books by Jonathan Cahn or listened to any of his YouTube videos or anything. That guy has written a couple of books, The Harbinger and The Mystery of the Shemitah, and that explains exactly the situation we're in.
I'll check it out. I do thank you for the recommendation, too, as well. And I live only a couple of blocks from a library, so I can pick up a lot of things there in my spare time. And believe me, I've got more of that than I probably need. You're up next, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Hey, Bill. I'm really disappointed. I'm a Mormon, and I haven't gotten any money or buyouts or payouts for my vote, and I'm curious as to where I get that.
Hold on for a minute. Hold on for a minute. I think what she was suggesting is that some of the people in the Senate or the House who actually are of the Mormon faith are under a lot of pressure from people, and sometimes they feel threatened.
And I'm not arguing that. There's definitely some political pressure that goes on, and you made a good point with Harry Reid. You know, if Mormons were pressured to buy other Mormons, I think Harry Reid would have been gone a long time ago, but he's not. So
he's a dangerous
and if that
man.
way you could call back and tell me where I could get my check, I'd sure appreciate it.
Thank you for the call. You're on the air 10 minutes away from 9 o'clock in 61.
I'm on the air.
Yes.
Well, it's kind of harsh to deal with the Mormons that way. I'd rather vote for a good Mormon than a bad Christian any day.
Sure.
But my point is, Mitt Romney, something was up with that, because if you remember when he debated Obama, he smoked him that first debate. And then all of a sudden he became an idiot after that. So somebody, in this day and age, though, it's hard to judge whether somebody was bribed or whether they found dirt on somebody or if they just made something up. Because with today's technology and today's media that won't dig any deeper, you could make anything look like anything you want it to. I mean, they could have video of something that he did.
Well, in Mitt Romney's case, that second debate, I think that too many Republicans fear the media, and they shouldn't. That they somehow believe that they have to appease them, because right after that debate, he started getting hammered by media. You had people like Candy Crowley cutting him off when he was absolutely spot on various issues. And I think he felt that he had to appease the media because he somehow believes the media, or they somehow believe the media represent what the actual feelings of the American people are.
You might be right, but he just seemed too smart to fall for that crap with the media.
I would hope so, but you may be right. It's 8:51. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This debate tonight, well, two debates. There's the back of the pack debate is the early debate. I think that's 5 o'clock Eastern, but you could probably watch that at 3 o'clock Eastern, or rather Mountain. A Mountain nowhere near Eastern. We should point that out. There's a couple of thousand miles between us. And then the other debate is scheduled for about 7 o'clock our time. So that'll take place following that. You may actually get better talking points in the first debate than in the second debate, because the second debate will have tremendous ratings because of the appearance of one candidate and what he's done so far. Check this out. 4 facts about the generation gap in the Republican Party. And they're talking about the various candidates. And this is one thing we should be recognizing. People like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul represent a new generation, and they're willing to criticize the old guard, where the old guard pretty much goes along, go along, get along might actually be their mantra. This comes from Timothy P. Carney at the Washington Examiner. Rand Paul was in high school when George Pataki was first elected to office. In 1981, he was elected mayor of Peekskill, New York. Number 2, Jeb Bush had been out of elected office for 6 years before Ted Cruz was sworn in for his elected position. 3, Scott Walker is far closer in age to Ivanka Trump, that's one of Donald's daughters, he's 14 years older, than to Donald Trump, who's 21 years older than Scott Walker. 4, when Marco Rubio was born, that was 1971, Jim Gilmore, who's the former Virginia governor. Actually, there are 2 former Virginia politicians who are now running for president. Jim Gilmore, Vietnam veteran, running as a Republican for president. And then you've got Jim Webb, also veteran, running for president on the Democrat line. They will not get the nominations. It would be fascinating, though, if they did. You'd have 2 Virginians, both decorated war heroes, who would be running against each other. That would be somewhat of a regional election, I guess, if that were to happen. Rubio, by the way, has been sliding in the polls. This is being documented by Byron York, Byron York over at the Washington Examiner. And he says a lot of that happens to be that Trump has sucked all of the air out of the room. So you've got that going on as well. A fellow by the name of Jeff Greenfield, who I was referencing a few minutes ago, has a piece today. What if Trump wins? And he says sometimes voters do break the rules, because Washington always likes to talk about conventional wisdom says. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's what we all agree on when we're sitting around smoking marijuana together at our posh homes in the suburbs of Washington. Oh, well, they don't smoke marijuana, do they? They just drink a lot of Cabernet. That's it. So when they're three sheets to the wind, giggling with each other about how they're smarter than everybody else, they come to these conclusions, and they believe that the American people also have come to those conclusions. But if you come out to Idaho or Nebraska or Kansas or New Mexico or Utah or Montana, you get an entirely different perspective. And he's talking about why Trump happens to be doing this. I have made some of the same comparisons. I made the comparison on air a few days ago to Jesse Ventura. I remember Ventura winning election in Minnesota, and then I met him actually at a convention. Not long after that, a couple of years later, I was at a convention, and we got to talking about pro wrestling because my dad was a pro wrestler on a regional level in Ohio, long before Jesse Ventura ever came along. And he turned out to be, as far as having a conversation with the guy, he turned out to be a really nice man, except I kept thinking I don't want to make him angry because it seems that with Jesse Ventura, there's always an undercurrent of hostility somewhere in there. But the writer says that Ventura was no stranger. He was hosting a very good talk radio program, was well known to the public because of that reason, and he was already the mayor of the sixth largest city in the state of Minnesota. And he said, so he already had some celebrity, if you will, when he won that election, a close three-way election. And then he goes on to say that in California, they had 117 opportunities for recall elections over a century and never did anything until 2003 when they suddenly surprised the media and recalled the governor. You may remember that, Gray Davis. And then he was replaced by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who also had celebrity power, who also was the leader of the President's Council on Physical Fitness and a member by marriage of the Kennedy clan. And so all of these people have something they share in common with Donald Trump, and that is they already had this big-time persona and known to the public before they got elected to office. 8:56. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Jeff Greenfield is probably a flaming liberal, writing that piece I was just telling you about. But I mentioned I admired his work on television years ago. I happened to be watching him on one election night, and they were just breaking up all of the smaller elections for the House of Representatives. In my home district, where I grew up, we were represented in Congress for about 20 years by a guy by the name of Amory Houghton Jr., and after the death of John Hines, who was a U.S. Senator and very wealthy, Houghton became the wealthiest member of Congress, worth about, personally, $500 million. His family ran Corning Glass, that is, the Steuben Glass Works in upstate New York. And here's something to be said about this. Greenfield, liberal, talking about conservative Congressman Houghton, said to his fellow panelists, he said he wins re-election every year because his constituents love him. Let me tell you, having grown up in that district, they've had two Democrats elected two Democrats since the 1830s, and both lasted maybe a term. They didn't last long at all. And usually they came in after a scandal in the Republican Party, and that was it. They got their one term, and then they were gone. But Greenfield brought this up, and he said his constituents love him. Why did they love him? Well, because a guy worth $500 million didn't need anybody else's campaign contribution. He wasn't beholden to anyone else. So he would go vote his constituents' needs, and he would listen to what they told him that they wanted. Unlike so many other members who have to rely on Wall Street and that big cash coming in at campaign time, and then they have some strings attached, obviously, because of that. And I admired Greenfield for pointing that out because that is so similar to what Donald Trump can do right now, whether you like him or not. And he's not necessarily my candidate for president, but whether you like him or not, he doesn't need anybody else's money, and therefore he's not going to be responsible to anyone but voters. 8:58, Bill Colley with you. Top story. We've got a guest coming up talking about national security and immigration and some threats that could be as serious as 9/11 or worse? That's on the way following 9 o'clock news from Fox here on Top Story.